More money and more weapons from more nations pour into Ukraine. Meet those moving aid throughout the war-torn country, and the Ukrainians just trying to keep their businesses afloat. Plus, an American technology facing criticism for how it's used in the war. Now, on the Inside Story, Ukraine increasing aid.
I'm Catherine Gibson, VOA's congressional correspondent at the rooftop studio at VOA headquarters. Behind me is the U.S. Capitol, where members of the House of Representatives and the U.S. Senate recently approved $40 billion in humanitarian and military aid to Ukraine. We'll drill down on the increased aid going to Ukraine from all around the world, including help documenting war crimes. Around 20 countries are sending new security assistance packages to Ukraine that ranges from attack helicopters to training. U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin and Joint Chiefs of Staff Chairman General Mark Milley outlined that promised help after a meeting of the Ukraine Defense Contact Group.
I'm especially grateful to Denmark, which announced today that it will provide a Harpoon launcher and missiles to help Ukraine defend its coast. I'd also like to thank the Czech Republic for its substantial support, including a recent donation of attack helicopters, tanks, and rocket systems. And today, several countries announced new donations of critically needed artillery systems and ammunition, including Italy, Greece, Norway, and Poland. And let me also recognize the United Kingdom for its leading role in helping to coordinate security assistance, and for the significant quantities of British equipment that continue to flow into Ukraine.
Last fall, the United States military had about 78,000 in EUCOM, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, and Space Force. In a few short months, we've bolstered that by over 30%. So this morning, we've got, roughly speaking, 102,000 U.S. troops in the EUCOM area of operations in many, many countries.
I won't speculate what's going on in Putin's mind, but we've seen him use a number of different levers from the very beginning. At the very outset, he envisioned using overwhelming force and speed and power to very rapidly take down the capital city and replace the government. They failed in that respect. And their forces were pushed back by the Ukrainians. They took Kharkiv. The Russians took Kharkiv for a short period of time. The Ukrainians counterattacked and took Kharkiv back. And so we've seen them really proceed at a very slow and unsuccessful pace on the battlefield. And you would expect that he would seek to use other levers of power or other instruments of power, and he's doing that. But in terms of what his overall strategy is, that's unknown.
While visiting U.S. allies in East Asia, President Joe Biden signed a $40 billion aid package that will provide Ukraine a wide range of humanitarian and military assistance.
Aid to Ukraine arriving just in time. The nearly $14 billion in military and humanitarian assistance passed by the U.S. Congress in March has almost run out. This massive new package passed with bipartisan support in a vote of 86 to 11.
We, Americans, all of us, Democrat and Republican, cannot afford to stick our heads in the sand while Vladimir Putin continues his vicious belligerence against the Ukrainian people, while he fires at civilian hospitals and targets and kills children and innocent people. But when Republicans, and a significant number, oppose this package, that is precisely the signal we're sending to enemies abroad.
All 11 of those senators were Republican, including Rand Paul, who delayed the vote by a week by arguing for greater U.S. government oversight of the aid. Some are also concerned the U.S. has sent too much money to Ukraine while Americans face rising costs of living. But the Senate's top Republican said the cost of not acting is too high.
Aid for Ukraine goes far beyond charity. The future of America's security and core strategic interests will be shaped by the outcome of this fight. Anyone concerned about the cost of supporting a Ukrainian victory should consider the much larger cost should Ukraine lose.
The U.S. also authorized $100 million in military equipment transfers.
There will be 18 155 millimeter howitzers, 18 tactical vehicles to tow those howitzers, and 18 artillery tubes, basically is our equivalent of a battalion, an artillery battalion, and 3 AN/TPQ-36 counter-artillery radars.
The effort to target Russian oligarchs who benefit from Russian President Vladimir Putin's decision to invade Ukraine will also receive an additional $100 million in funding. $900 million will go to aid Ukrainian refugees and $4.4 billion to address a food supply crisis.
The food supply for millions of Ukrainians and millions more around the world has quite literally been held hostage by the Russian military.
That aid is expected to be dispersed quickly once the bill receives Biden's signature. Since the February 24th invasion, the U.S. has sent nearly $54 billion in aid to Ukraine.
Millions of kilos of grain are stuck in Ukraine as Russian warships in the Black Sea pose danger for ships getting the grain out of the country. Ukraine's economy minister called on the international community to help ensure safe passage of grain ships. The backup is causing world food prices to rise and could create food shortages in many countries. VOA Midwestern correspondent Kane Fairbaugh discovered what happens on Ukraine's battlefield can be felt in America's cornfields.
As he plants corn and soybeans in his fields in northern Illinois.
That wasn't bad. No, not at all.
Farmer Mark Tuttle expects this to be a very good year for crop prices.
We sold corn for $2 for a long time. We got by, and now we got corn at today. I just saw it was $8.
Soybean prices are also near record highs. That's the good news.
But that's at the expense of other things.
Like input costs to buy fertilizer and seeds.
But back when corn was $2, seed corn was maybe $80 an acre. Now seed corn is getting to be $140, $50, $60 an acre. So everything's kind of doubled.
That's because the global supply chain to support and distribute grain crops like corn, soybeans, and wheat is still experiencing disruptions stemming from the coronavirus pandemic, compounded now by Russia's war with Ukraine.
There's almost no shipping taking place out of the Black Sea, which is the combination of both Russia, which ships almost entirely through the Black Sea ports, combined with Ukraine. So right there you've got 30% of the global exports of wheat being shut off due to that war. And then you also have an impact on corn exports as well.
Mike Doherty, a senior economist with the Illinois Farm Bureau, says Russia is also a key international supplier of oil and natural gas. Now subject to sanctions as a result of its war with Ukraine, Russian supplies on the international marketplace are dwindling as buyers search elsewhere, causing petroleum prices to spike.
It's all part of that energy complex, and these increasing petroleum prices are really what's behind, or the drivers behind these increasing fertilizer prices.
Farmers rely on fertilizer to help their crops thrive. But that's not all that's cutting into Tuttle's bottom line. He says the price of diesel fuel to power his tractors and trucks has also nearly doubled since last year.
I know they want to switch over to more green energy sources, but in the same sense, all of us farmers are running on diesel fuel. And so you can't limit our supply right now.
War in Eastern Europe, drought in the western United States and South America, and increased demand for biofuels derived from corn and soybeans to offset the increased cost of petroleum are all contributing to increased costs for food and rising inflation.
Inflation's tough on us right now. 8, 9, 10%, whatever they're talking, it's affected right at the farm gate all the way to the consumer.
Which is why Tuttle's outlook for this year is tempered by the reality that the more money he makes,
and then we'll put 2 in on this end and 2 in on the other end,
the more he has to spend.
The margins probably compared to 20 years ago are very similar. You're just handling a lot more money. The tractors now cost $250,000. We used to buy tractors for $80,000. So it's just a matter of inflation and how things are. So standard of living probably won't change a whole lot. It's just dollars in, dollars out.
a price structure impacted by Russia's war on Ukraine.
War is not good for anybody.
Kane Fairbaugh, VOA News, Salmonock, Illinois.
A Russian soldier was sentenced to life in prison by a Ukrainian court after pleading guilty to war crimes. Sergeant Vadim Sheshermarin was sentenced for killing a 62-year-old Ukrainian man in the early days of the war. War crimes investigators are rushing to collect evidence of the brutality of Russia's invasion. VOA correspondent Veronica Balderas Iglesias takes us inside the cutting-edge technology they're using. A warning: what you are about to see includes some disturbing images.
More than 50,000 police officers have been deployed to the combat areas of Ukraine. They're not just working to repel Russia's invasion, they're also investigating crimes, war crimes.
Almost 21,000 criminal proceedings have been filed for crimes committed under martial law. Among them are almost 9,000 criminal proceedings on the facts of crimes committed on the territory of Ukraine by servicemen of the armed forces of the Russian Federation and their accomplices.
A mission of experts tasked by the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe found what they call clear patterns of international humanitarian law violations.
There have been cases of killings, there have been cases of torture, there have been cases of rapes.
Dangerous conditions prevented them from working on site, but they didn't need to. There's a vast digital record.
There is practically everything visible on the internet in form of videos, in form of pictures, or also in testimonies of victims.
21st century forensics are helping Ukraine's Prosecutor General Irina Venediktova too. She has gathered thousands of photos and videos by crowdsourcing through an official website.
Social media is very important too, because we can use these open resources, and we have the team of near 100 prosecutors who work with open resources. And for us, very useful to analyze this information.
But making these images admissible in a trial is the goal of the British charity behind the Eyewitness to Atrocities app. The app collects the time, location, and other verification data that prosecutors can take to court.
First is where and when the footage was taken, making sure that we know that information, making sure the footage hasn't been edited, so its integrity is intact, and making sure that we could trace the lifespan of that footage to know that nobody had any access to make any changes.
It's a tsunami of information that the Ukrainian authorities need to comb through. The United States is helping protect this motherlode from hackers.
The war that's being fought in the information sphere is just as active as what's going on the ground. We're trying to provide a wide range of support to the Ukrainian authorities to help them deal with all the contingencies that they're going to confront as they look into these crimes.
At the United Nations, Prosecutor Karim Khan of the International Criminal Court told VOA that tech isn't a substitute for older forensic tools, but it extends the power of human recollection.
You can imagine a witness very often traumatized. With the passage of time, their memories naturally may change, may falter. If forensic evidence is collected properly, it's more capable to be viewed as reliable once it's been tested and it's been looked into.
It may take years before the evidence reaches the criminal court. Russian authorities who deny war crimes didn't respond to numerous interview requests. There are allegations of war crimes by Ukrainian nationals, though far fewer. The Ukrainian Prosecutor General Venediktova told VOA she will investigate and cooperate with the International Criminal Court. Veronica Balderas Iglesias for VOA News, Washington.
Facial recognition software is now being used by the Ukrainian government to identify captured and deceased Russian soldiers. Some approve of its accuracy in pinpointing a person, but there are growing concerns about how images are obtained. VOA's Julie Tabo explains the controversy.
In the fog of war, identifying people can be critical. A dead or captured enemy soldier, someone looting, someone crossing the border, documenting war crimes. The Ukrainian government says facial recognition software is helping it identify people as the country continues to battle Russia. Ukrainian government agencies are using the software, donated by a U.S. firm, to identify Russian soldiers, dead and alive, in the country within minutes.
Inside the National Police of Ukraine, we have more than 5 departments who use it. Facial recognition, it's one of the very, very useful tools which we use right now, and it works perfect.
Clearview AI, a controversial U.S. facial recognition software firm, has given Ukrainian officials use of its database of billions of faces to check the identities of Russian soldiers. Clearview collects images from sites like Facebook and other public websites, including from Russian social media sites such as Vkontakte or VK. Clearview is controversial in the U.S. because of how it obtains photos and how its software has been used. As part of a recent court settlement, Clearview agreed to sell its software only to law enforcement. In Ukraine, officials first tested the software on identifying the dead, starting with Russian soldiers.
They had photos of 2 deceased soldiers. One of them had identification on them, and the other one did not. And so just from the photo of the face, they're able to run it through the system, and they have been able to identify the online social media profile of the person who's now deceased, even with some facial damage.
In some cases, the Ukrainian government has posted photos of deceased Russian soldiers on Russian social media platforms to alert their families.
During the first month of the war, Russian relatives, they just said that you are lying, and for example, our son, he's just on some kind of trainings, and he is not take part in any kind of war activity, and he is not in Ukraine. These cases, Clearview AI, it's the best solution to provide truth to Russian people, to relatives of soldiers.
Some observers have raised concerns
that Clearview AI's business model is taking your face data that you've put up maybe on an online photo album or on your social media accounts for a very different purpose and turned it into a weapon that's now being used in a theater of war.
Many critics of Clearview, like Hare, advocate for stronger regulations of the technology. For those caught in the crosshairs of war, facial recognition software is seen as helpful. Julie Tabo, VOA News.
7.7 million Ukrainians are said to be displaced within the country because of the war. For those with a business, it becomes a challenge to stay in business. From Lviv, our Anna Kostyushenko shows us a few businesses that are flourishing despite the war.
All these people are entrepreneurs who once had their own offices in Kharkiv, Ukraine's second largest city.
My business started as a small travel company. Then it was transformed into an educational center where we were teaching German, Polish, and English.
For 15 years, Serhiy Savitsky worked to establish his business. But when Kharkiv became a Russian target, he had to stop operations and many of his employees fled. Savitsky also evacuated his family members who went abroad. He eventually settled in Lviv, where he became a volunteer.
As we were evacuating, we heard explosions. We were panicking, but I knew that if I was not a member of the armed forces and was not there holding a gun, I should find another way to be useful to my country. I'm good at connecting people, so it was not that hard. All the entrepreneurs there were looking for something like this.
Savitsky united Kharkiv's entrepreneurs and set up a humanitarian center designed to help people from eastern Ukraine. Maxim Udovichenko owns a chain of supermarkets in Kharkiv. His own house was destroyed by a Russian missile. Now he helps evacuate people. In many cases, he has to persuade them to leave.
Constant bombings interfere with people's ability to think,
so they believe they are safe. But I see the whole picture, and I understand that soon this zone will be cut off, and then even volunteers won't be able to evacuate people, as was the case in Mariupol.
Entrepreneurs at this center also collect humanitarian aid and organize targeted assistance to over 1,000 people a day. Aid comes from the United States and all over Europe, says Pavlo Pizmenkov, the manager of this project.
We establish contacts with international and Ukrainian donors in order to collect and send humanitarian aid to Kharkiv. We organize targeted deliveries to those who cannot reach the delivery point. We receive groceries, diapers for children and adults, and equipment and gear for rescuers.
Years of business experience allow these entrepreneurs to quickly organize deliveries, figure out logistics, and keep things under control.
I control the logistics hub and the activities of volunteers who work with residents, territorial defense, the armed forces, who work hard to make sure they are doing what's most needed.
All the people in this pop-up humanitarian center say they have the same goal.
Happy smiles of all children, not just mine, of all Ukrainians, are important to me. It is very difficult for me to see the children under tremendous stress, sitting in basements.
This unusual business center is operating practically around the clock 7 days a week. For Anna Kushchochenko in Lviv, Ukraine, Arash Arabasadi, VOA News.
As the war in Ukraine wages on, controlling the messaging on Russia's invasion has become a priority for the Kremlin. With the government handing out stiff punishments, many anti-war protesters are fleeing the country for safety. VOA's Henry Ridgewell is in Helsinki, Finland, and has the story of two artists now living in exile.
Theatre director Mikhail Dernenkov and actor Alexei Yudnikov are both long-standing enemies of the Kremlin. For decades, their performances parodied the Russian government and its leader Vladimir Putin, testing the boundaries of expressive freedom under constant state surveillance. Following Russia's invasion of Ukraine, both men fled the country and have found temporary shelter at a haven run by the organization Artists at Risk in Helsinki, Finland.
We left the country simply so as not to be on the side that is waging war, so as not to cast our votes in this way. If I'm here, that means I can speak. I must speak, and I must help the protest voices from Russia to be heard, because in Russia it is impossible.
Anti-war protests in Russia have been brutally suppressed. A new law imposes jail terms of up to 15 years for spreading what the Kremlin calls fake news about the invasion. Dernenkov says the space for freedom of expression has all but disappeared.
There's an unspoken law that now exists in Russian society, whereby if you are a country at war and if you say something, you are selling out your country at the front line, and this will be punished instantly, severely, that very second.
Ukrainian-born actor Alexei Yudnikov also fled Moscow following the invasion, leaving behind his family.
I feel pain and personal guilt. What could I alone change? I couldn't find any better option than just leaving. It was spontaneous, an instinctive gesture to leave, but also to try again here in Finland. Simply because here, outside of Russia, you can tell the truth.
Yudnikov staged a protest outside the Russian pavilion at the recent Venice Biennale art festival in Italy. He says the invasion of Ukraine has unleashed a parallel war within Russia.
The henchmen of this regime are trying to impose absolutely shamelessly this formula, that Putin is Russia, and that these things do not exist without each other. This is a war between reality and escape. If you like, it is a war between something real and something fake.
Dernenkov and Yudnikov are among the artists who have fled Russia since the invasion to preserve their freedom, but also to continue voicing their opposition. They don't know if or when they will return home. Henry Ridgewell for VOA News, Helsinki.
That's all for now. For everyone behind the scenes who produces this show, I am Katherine Gibson. Follow me on Twitter at KGYP, that's KGYP. And follow VOA News on Instagram and Facebook. Online, stay up to date at voanews.com. Thanks for being with us. See you next week for the Inside Story.